So Martin is the director of ChildAid. Thank you again so much, Martin, for joining us this evening and being able to share with us. So ChildAid supports families in need across Eastern Europe and have been heavily involved in Ukraine as well in terms of everything that's gone on with the war. So Martin, over to you, and thank you again so much for sharing with us this evening. Martin, you'll need to unmute, sorry.
Is that okay now?
That's perfect, thank you.
Yeah. I've got a technical issue. In fact, I can't see anything on the screen at all again. So, but that's fine as long as you can hear me. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Grev, for this opportunity to share our mission in Eastern Europe. Some of you may have heard of ChildAid to Eastern Europe, or one of our four named organizations. We were established 50 years ago as Aid to Russian Christians out of Keston Institute. And in those days, it was a mission to support the persecuted church in the Soviet Union. And very much as time progressed, we adopted to the needs of the region. So today, we exist really to minister to the vulnerable and the disadvantaged children, young people, and as already been said, families in Moldova, Ukraine, and still we're blessed to be able to support people in need in Belarus. Our mission in Russia obviously had to cease in February 2022, but their needs of the population are still great, and our prayers continue to be with the people of Russia. So the wonderful mission of Breadline, with whom I've had the opportunity to partner with over the years, will speak more about Moldova. So I will very quickly skip through our activities in Moldova so that I can focus more of the time that I have on Ukraine. ChildAid, initially our main project in Moldova is based in the capital. And that is a multidisciplinary project called the Tony Hawk Center. And a team there of therapists deliver a wide range of therapies, massage, physio, speech, play, music, and hydrotherapy. And in the course of the year, they will support somewhere in the region of 600 children from those transformative therapies. In addition, they will provide parental education and social inclusion so that it's a holistic approach to enabling the children and their families to be integrated into society, get access to kindergartens, to schools, and ultimately to join the mainstream of society. As part of our program with Tony Hawk Center, we're also managing an introduction to the disciplines of occupational therapy across Moldova. And this is a modular training program for therapists, not just at our center, but at centers across the area, across Moldova, from Rishkan through to the south, Cahul. And that's the aim, to train those disciplines of occupational therapies with the intention of encouraging both state and the universities to adopt a formal occupational therapy course so that eventually the country can attain some form of accredited status in occupational therapy. Another area of support for Moldova, and I'm sure Sarah will probably mention this as well, is that there never seems to be a let-up in demand for wheelchairs or mobility equipment such as relators, lecky walkers, verticalizers. We've been blessed to be supported by one of the NRS healthcare organizations, one of their regional hubs, so that we can make a delivery probably twice a year of the lorry load of such essentially required mobility equipment, which we feed through the Tony Hawk Center across the country. A third area, and I'm particularly looking at healthcare issues, is we partner with another UK charity some of you may have heard of. I'm sure Sarah has, MAD-Aid, initially based in the Isle of Wight, now they're in Northampton. And here we supported most recently a complete refurbishment of a neonatal ward in the Mother and Child Hospital in Chisinau. And quite honestly, it was something probably akin to what you may consider to be a Victorian looking hospital ward prior to the work. And it's now pretty much state of the art up to UK standards. And there is a development there to do that in a 2 or 3 more wards over the years to come. And finally, we have in Moldova a couple of partners who support vulnerable families and children away from healthcare, and they're offering education support and also family support. And one of those is in the troubled area called Transnistria, where there are 6,000 Russian troops, and there has been ongoing battles for the last 30 years between Moldova and the Transnistrian area. But we're pleased to be able to support families in desperate need in that troubled zone. But I particularly want to, as I mentioned, come back to Ukraine. So ChildAid has been in Ukraine since we started in 1973, so well before not only the 2022 invasion, but also before the taking of Crimea and the usurpation of the Donbass area in eastern Ukraine. And so I want to look briefly at an overview of our mission in Ukraine, and then dwell a little bit of time on the impact of the war on Ukrainians, and particularly Ukrainian children and families. So we have in Ukraine 3 main partners, and we've maintained their support, and they have maintained their activities and obviously extended their activities as a result of the conflict. And our largest one is in East Central Ukraine in a city called Kamiensk. And this is a project which touched somewhere in the region of 1,000 children's lives, those living in vulnerable families, those with disabilities, orphans, and refugees from the original Donbass invasion, and now increasing the numbers of support from the wider conflict. Areas of care will include anything from summer camps through to educational, family, material support, and vital independent living work with teenage orphans. It also is one of the few projects, if not the only project, in that city of about 250,000 inhabitants that offer any form of therapy and social support for children living with disability, particularly with physical disabilities, across that area. Our second project is in a city called Makarev, which is about 60 kilometers west of Kyiv. And here we have a small rehabilitation and community center. And here we're serving children with a range of disabilities. And here we're particularly specializing in autism as well. And we do own in Makarev 2 hectares of land. And we have approved drawings for an exciting community and children's rehabilitation centre. In fact, we were ready to start building, but it was a real blessing that we hadn't started work and got any further, because Makarev was occupied for a brief period by Russian forces, and we're pretty sure they would have caused extensive damage to any building work. So it was a blessing that hadn't started. Then our third main project partner that we support is far in the west in Mukachevo in the Carpathian Mountains. So this project provides independent living skills to orphans, plus we have a large foster home, and they have done extensive work with supporting refugees, because it being a relatively safe refuge area for Ukrainians, they have had a vast numbers come through that area. With the outbreak of the war, we've also provided extensive support where we can, and where we have been alerted to church groups, to volunteer groups, and that's been in Odessa, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Bucha, and Uzhgorod, across a number of different areas of activity as and when the need was required. So I want to go on to talk about the impact of the war. Now, we've all seen the horrific images, and we hear of the horrors in that country. And some of the reports we get back from our partners is very much that the mood of the Ukrainian people is one of deep depression and deep anxiety. They are all filled, as you would expect, with fears of the uncertainty of the outcome of war. They're tired of war now after 800 plus days. They're tired of the loss. They're tired of the sacrifice. And indeed, they're beginning to feel tired of what they consider to be betrayal. There are deep socio-economic and political problems. And there is an intense level of Russian propaganda coming from both outside and inside the country. And they're getting to the extent they're not now sure who to believe. One of the consequences of that is that on the domestic side of things, domestic violence has increased, divorces have become more frequent, disabled people who left the country initially are returning and putting the whole service social care structure under deep pressure. And a sad consequence is not only are we seeing obviously many deaths through the war, but the level of suicides are showing a steep increase. People do still want to leave the country, although obviously young men are unable to. And to that extent, that law, the new law that's come in recently on mobilization, is another element of fear across the country. So there is a deep anger, not just at the Russians' invasion, but also with the way that the war is running. In a particular area that we worked in Uzhgorod, which is again near Makuchevo in the Transcarpathian Mountains, we had been supporting a new group that had set up a mother and baby home for refugees passing through the area. It was a relatively safe region, and it still is. But as the number of refugees began to ease, though there wasn't such that the flow wasn't happening, there was less need of such a centre. And so they and ourselves turned attention to helping 3 orphanages that had moved in total from the Donetsk area in the east. Now, they came with really little more than the shirts on their back, and in more than one case, shrapnel in their bodies. So as well as providing essentials such as clothing, bedding, the children were encouraged to write letters to Santa this past Christmas. And the idea was that the staff wanted to bring some form of normality and plan to buy the gifts that the children had asked for. And to fairly typify how children are reacting, one child wrote, "Dear Santa, I hope that you are safe and well, and that when you fly your sleigh over Ukraine, you are not hit by a Russian rocket." There is deep scarring in children's minds, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Then I just want to move back to Makuchevo, where one of our project partners is based, and give you an account of one family supported by our partner there, a partner called New Beginning. And it highlights the fragility of what families are coping with. And many are experiencing not just the immediate effect of war, but seeing the darker side of a society which is being torn apart. So Zana has 2 children. They're aged 10 and 12. And they left the eastern part of Ukraine in the first month of the full-scale invasion. They came to our partner, New Beginning, who had set up a refugee point of contact program. And they received detailed information of where and what kind of help could be obtained in the area of Makuchevo. She was added to a contact group, which reports on events and opportunities for refugees in the area. We started support groups for the children and age-related clubs. which really were more psychological in their intention, but also fun in their delivery. And the parents themselves were given some support groups. And Zana came to such a support group, and like many others, she brought her worries and her problems, and these were shared. And the burden was eased across for all those involved. They became regular visitors to both the support groups and the children's clubs. Zana then suddenly one evening became very ill indeed. She had burning pains in her chest and called out to her children, which she wouldn't normally do when she had some discomfort, which she did have a record of. But this time she couldn't breathe, and she woke up her daughter. They called an ambulance, and she was rushed to hospital. And the doctors fought for her life overnight, and with a blessing, they stabilized her. She was given 4 stents, which were funded by a charitable organization in the city for such matters. After surgery, she was in intensive care. The children then called our partner, and they were frightened. They didn't know what to do, where to go, and explained the situation. So we have a psychologist within our team, and she went to the hospital immediately to find out. Upon arriving at the hospital, she saw a man talking to Zana in the intensive care unit, and he was threatening to take the children away because she would not be able to cope with her parental responsibilities. And that he said he'd been watching the girls for a long time and saw that she was a single mum, and that she would not be able to be a good mum in the future now that her health was so poor. Our partner asked the doctor who had let that man in and how he could be bothering Zana at such a moment. The doctor said that he'd introduced himself as being from the social services, and that he was here to pick up the children that Zana could no longer take care of. So we carefully explained that Zana was a good mother, she was a good parent, and in the interim, our partner directors are also foster parents and could officially take the children into temporary care. As it transpires, as you would probably imagine, the man had nothing to do with social services, and that all he wanted to do was to get the girls with unknown but expected intentions. He left the hospital, never to be seen again, and the 2 girls were clearly saved from being abducted and trafficked, as sadly too many children are at this time in Ukraine. So it's a difficult moment in the lives of families such as Zana, and if there had been no program such as we were able to put on, then the plight of those children and Zana does not bear thinking about. Now, fortunately, that Zana is out of hospital, and the children happily and willingly join our faith-based children's clubs, and Zana continues with her support groups. I just want to spend the last few moments looking at trauma. I mentioned before how children are being affected by the ongoing war. According to the World Health Organization's European region, 10 million Ukrainians are at the risk of mental disorders, which includes acute stress, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and post-traumatic stress. 75% of children have and are suffering various psychological traumas. The task before all of us is simply too huge for any single organization to be able to undertake. So what we have to do is our own small part to make a small difference in as many lives as possible. ChildAid have already put on some play therapy coaching, which we've reported to do before to you kind people, Medical Missionary News. And that has been coaching our partners in play therapy and the various techniques. We're now working on a new program, still in its very early days, but this will involve one of a number of elements, and it could include partnering with an existing organization we have contacts with who have got agreements with a number of Ukrainian psychological associations, and they can bring together up to 1,000 psychologists and psychotherapists to help develop programs for children. In other areas, we could look at develop a program led by a UK group called Family Psychology, who will look to particularly work with groups of orphans, those ones I mentioned in Uzhhorod particularly, who have come from the Donetsk regions. And we will look to devise a formal program of training using either eye movement desensitization and reprocessing or trust-based relational intervention. What we want to do initially is to train up local people and provide, so we can provide them with an income to enable them to not only stay in Ukraine earning an income for themselves and their families, but also deliver trauma care to the caregivers and the children itself. And we've seen this in a program funded by a Rotary group, which is working around creative art therapy. So as I said, not every child can be helped and not every program will work. And it's a question of getting the right balance within the resources that we can and the support mechanisms that we can pull together. So that really brings me on to our prayer points, which for Ukraine, very simply, it's about continuing to pray for peace and particularly the safety of children and families. But we also value prayers for our plans to develop a trauma therapy program. It is a very daunting task with the huge numbers involved and the difficulty and the intensity of the trauma that's being encountered. And we really need God's guidance in which way to go, and we need to listen to what He wants us to do and where He leads us. So prayers for that. And then in Moldova, we have a couple of prayer points for there as well. On a political state, we would pray that the Russian interference in the country does not disrupt the move to more open and equal society. There's upcoming presidential elections and EU referendums, and we know that Russian interference is playing a toll on society. We've continued to receive a prayer to continue to receive much more needed mobility equipment so that we can send out not just to our own project partners, but to anyone in need. And then finally, I mentioned our project, the Tony Hawk Centre. Our centre founder and director, a lady called Dr. Diana Kowalczyk, she's now in her 70s. She needs to rest. She needs to retire and enjoy the rest of her life without the pressures of running the centre. So we need a new figurehead leader, and we welcome prayers for that as well. So thank you very much for letting me do a very brief run through of our work in Ukraine and Moldova, and bless you.
Thank you so much for that, Martin. I mean, it's a huge amount to be praying for. You often hear sort of infrequent updates on Ukraine and BBC News and things now, and it just it just seems constant destruction. So I do love getting your updates and there being a little bit of light being brought back into these families' lives that so desperately need it. So we will certainly be praying. But thank you so much for sharing that this evening. I really appreciate it.